Shortness of breath and elevated heart rate. These are common experiences. First of all, most of you by now, the reason why we want you to sit 30 minutes before we take your vital signs, because if you get up and walk to the bathroom, your heart's going to be racing. That's going to happen to everyone. Okay? Now, if it's racing all the time, there's a good chance you're not getting enough water, because that will do it. If you're dehydrated, remember what happens is and I'm not sure if you've all heard this yet. This is information some of you probably don't know, but the body is constantly replacing everything, right, at different rates. So most of our cells are replaced every month. Some, like hair cells, take 7 years, but most are replaced much faster than that. And blood cells, every minute of your life, your body is retiring 2 million blood cells to replace them, okay? In order to replace them, it needs the raw materials to make new ones. Now, it can recycle some of what's there, but not all of it, okay? So the limiting factor, because blood is 92% water, the limiting factor is water. So if you don't drink enough water, your blood volume is going to drop. And this is how I can tell whether you drank enough water or not by looking at your blood pressure, pulse, and temperature. I've figured out how to interpret those things to see whether you're getting enough water. If on the days, how many of you had the experience where your spread wasn't very good? I said you need to drink more water, you did, and it got better. Anyone had that experience? It works, right? We can see this happening. You'll feel better, you'll function better, etc. So your body's retiring 2 million blood cells. In order to make new ones, it has to have enough water. If you don't drink enough water, your blood volume drops. If your blood volume drops, the average person's blood pressure is going to drop. Now, this only happens in bodies that aren't perfectly healthy, which includes 100% of the people we've seen here over the last 23 years. Okay, we've never seen anyone perfectly healthy. If you've been eating a conventional diet for much of your life, you've got plaque in your arteries, okay? According to a study published about 6 years ago, the older one, let's see, maybe 20 years ago, said the average 14-year-old's arteries were 40% occluded, 40% blocked with plaque in North America. The most recent study said that the average 9-year-old's arteries were 30% blocked with plaque, which means they're going to be ahead of the 14-year-old from 20 years earlier. Okay, it's gotten worse, not better. Okay, so what happens? What do we call atherosclerosis? What's the common name for that? Anyone know? It's called hardening of the arteries. As the arteries are lined with plaque, they're no longer flexible. Arteries are supposed to be flexible. And so if, let's say, when the heart beats, the arteries can actually help move blood. But what happens is they lose flexibility, and of course the diameter is getting smaller and smaller because they're no longer able to dilate when necessary. And now you're losing space as this plaque builds up. And so pressure goes up. If the arteries are inflexible and blood volume drops, what happens to the pressure? Because let's say, before I answer the question, let's say you're out in the jungle and you cut yourself, you lose a bunch of blood. What would your body do to maintain blood pressure in that situation with less blood volume? If you had healthy arteries, would constrict the blood vessels. Okay? Constricting the blood vessels would allow you to maintain pressure. This is basic physics. So what happens if the arteries are lined with plaque? Well, it can't constrict them. And so the diameter doesn't change, but the blood volume changes. Now the pressure goes down. If the pressure goes down, in order to get enough oxygen and nutrients to your brain, what needs to happen?
The heart needs to work way harder.
Heart has to beat faster. So if your heart is racing all the time, you're probably not getting enough water. Okay, this is probably where your spread's going to be too low, and that's why your heart's going to race. So there's usually a 1-to-1 correlation. If your spread should be, let's say your blood pressure is 115, or let's say 115 over 70, which isn't too bad, but at 115, let's say 115 over 80, okay? So the spread, the difference between systolic and diastolic pressure is 35 points. But at 115, it should be roughly 48 points, which means it's much lower than it should be. It's 13 points lower. So if your spread is 13 points lower than it should be, your pulse will usually be 13 points faster than it would have been. Okay, if you can get the spread up, the pulse will come down. Okay, make sense? All right, shortness of breath. As the body is breaking down plaque in the arteries, which it begins to do right away, you got all this garbage in your bloodstream, the body's ability to carry oxygen is going to be limited. And in fact, I mean, coming back to the last conversation, right? If your blood volume is lower because you're not drinking enough water, will your body be able to carry as much oxygen? How can it? The blood, the molecules of blood, red blood cells are carrying oxygen. If you have less of them, you're carrying less oxygen. And so your shortness of breath isn't because your lungs aren't working. It's because there isn't enough blood to move enough oxygen to your cells. So you feel like you're having trouble getting enough air, even though you're inhaling perfectly well, it's not getting to your cells. Okay? So this happens. I mean, people often will come to me and say, I can't breathe. And some of you have already figured out I'm a bit of a smartass. I'll say, you are breathing. Right? But what they mean is it feels labored. It's difficult. Right? And these are the reasons why this happens. Okay? It's not a problem. What you want to do is increase the water intake, right? Rest as much as you can. Obviously, the less active you are, the less of an issue this is. The lower your oxygen demands are, the less of an issue it is. Okay? Does this make sense to everyone? Now, by the way, I mean, medicine says the spread should always be 40 points. 120 over 80. They're perfect. And sometimes they'll say, it's okay if it's less than that. So I frequently have people in their 60s or 70s who tell me, yeah, I just saw the doctor, my blood pressure was 132 over 86, and they said that was fine. That's a 46-point spread, or even over 90, right, where it should be a 54-point spread. That's not that good. The spread is 18% lower than it should be, which means, first of all, what that means is that they're probably dehydrated and certainly don't have enough blood in their body, right? And now why do I say that? So looking at your spread doesn't tell us if you're hydrated or not. Not exactly. But there's a correlation. Blood's pretty important. Can we agree on that? Right? Your body's pretty smart. And so what your body is likely to do, if it's able to, is take water from things that are not vital to your survival to make enough blood. So if your blood volume, if your spread is too low, which is a reflection of blood volume, we know you're dehydrated. Because if you were hydrated, that wouldn't happen. Okay? Now, if your blood volume, if your spread is perfect, we don't know that you're hydrated. It's possible that you simply drank enough water to make enough blood, and that your body is still dehydrated. But, okay, does that make sense? It's possible to have a good spread and still be dehydrated, but it's not possible to have a bad spread and be hydrated. That can't happen. So if your spread is lower than it should be, which is often the case for people fasting, we can see that you're not fully hydrated.
So is 54 the ideal spread?
The question was, is 54 the ideal spread? Again, you guys are jumping the gun. Let me finish. Okay? So medicine says spread should be 40 points. Doesn't make any sense to me. The spread needs to be proportional to your pressure. Okay? Anyone ever watch a series of video interviews I did with a client here in Costa Rica named Shelley? Shelley was an old friend of mine who was morbidly obese. At the time he started his fast, he was probably 270 pounds or so. You remember these videos? Because when he started, his blood pressure was like 225 over 125. Okay, his spread was 100 points. If your blood pressure is that high, the spread should be 100 points. Okay, we had somebody yesterday whose spread was 70 points. It was appropriate for the level of their pressure. Okay, and on the other side, I mean, sometimes the blood pressure is quite low. Imagine if your systolic pressure were 65 points and your spread were 40. I mean, 65 is too low. But if it were that low and your spread were 40, you wouldn't be able to get up. If your diastolic pressure, your resting pressure were 25, you wouldn't be able to move your arm or your head. There wouldn't be enough pressure to move your body. Okay, does this make sense? So if your pressure is very low, the spread should be much smaller than 40 points. And if the pressure is much higher, your spread should be much higher than 40 points. And what I've worked out over the years is that what I believe to be true is that at 120 points of pressure, the spread should be 50 at 120. Okay? For every 10-point change in pressure, the spread should change roughly 3 points, or by about a third. Okay? So if your pressure is 100, the spread should be roughly 43. Okay? If your pressure is 150, the spread should be roughly 60 points. Does this make sense to everyone? Because there will be an exam. Yeah.
I have a question. Could it also be detoxification on the heart rate?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Again, as I said, these are likely causes, but sure. How many of you ever saw a video? Some of you, we already talked about this with some of you, but how many of you ever saw a video called Chronic Constipation and Crack Cocaine? Isn't that a great title? I think I'm going to call all my videos that from now on. So the video was about a young woman who fasted 40 days and who at the end, while refeeding, her heart began racing, really, really racing. And it turned out she was dumping cocaine into her bloodstream from use 10 years earlier. So if you're dumping, in fact, we'll see people here, if someone comes in with a cigarette, a nicotine habit, and they've just stopped smoking. We had a guy last session, I think it was, and maybe the session before. He got here, stepped outside, had his last cigarette, and then came in. Okay, I swear. No, he was like addicted to cigarettes. And so usually on about day 5, they start dumping nicotine. Nicotine's a powerful stimulant. So what happens to heart rate when all this stuff is being dumped in the bloodstream? Starts going really fast. Okay. They also start smelling like an ashtray. You can smell the nicotine coming through their skin. It's true. If someone has been consuming a lot of coffee, same thing happens. And it's the same with speed or cocaine. Any powerful stimulant, as the body's dumping this, their heart rate is going to race. But there are many substances that when you're fasting, your body might be dumping. They're not necessarily stimulants normally, but your fasting body says, this is nasty stuff. Let's get rid of it as quickly as possible. So what does it do? How does it accomplish getting rid of it as quickly as possible? It raises your heart rate to pump it to your kidneys faster, where it's filtered out of your blood. Okay, so it's possible that your heart rate is up because of something you're dumping into your bloodstream. If your spread is okay, that's likely what's going on. But if your spread is too low, it's probably because the spread is too low. And remember, everything is connected. So this morning someone said, oh, my blood sugar is too high, right? Why is this too high? Look at your spread. The spread is way too low. If the spread is too low, what is that reflecting? Blood volume. It's how much blood you have. Okay? If your blood volume is much lower than it should be, what would you expect to be true about your sugar? It's going to be more concentrated. Okay? All we have to do to get that blood sugar down is get that person hydrated, get the blood volume back up. Okay, does this make sense? By the way, you guys now know more about all of this stuff than any doctor. because they don't teach this in medical school. Okay, I fasted 9 or 10 doctors so far, 3 of them twice. None of them knew anything about this. When I explained the spread, they're like, oh, that makes sense. But they didn't learn anything about this. This is why they're telling people that have a 30-point spread where it should be 54 that it's okay, because they don't know. Oh, so I started to say the other problem is, I mean, not only are these people dehydrated, but if they were actually hydrated, that 126, which is already too high, wouldn't be 126. If the spread was 12 points too low, the pressure probably would go up by 16 or 18 points if they were fully hydrated. It wouldn't go up just by the change in the spread itself, because as it goes up, the necessary spread goes up. So that if they were fully hydrated, the pressure might be 18 points higher. Instead of 126, it might be 144. Now, I don't think many people are going to tell a 70-year-old client that it's perfectly okay to have blood pressure of 144, because what that would mean statistically is that their risk of heart attack or stroke was almost 50% greater than the average person their age. And the average person their age is already not very good shape with regard to heart attacks. You don't want to have an increased risk, okay? Hi, enjoying my videos? If you'd like to learn much more, check out the Academy for Vibrant Living, where our Vibrant Health course will teach you everything you need to know to take your health to an amazing new level. And if you'd like to turn your passion for health into a lucrative career, check out the Health Coaching course, where you can become a professional certified health coach and help as many people as possible see amazing results.